If you watched Fox So-Called News this morning, you learned that President Obama is trying to buy votes with food stamps. What you didn't learn, though, was basic economics. Here was the Fox and Friends gang this morning mocking a new ad by the U.S. Department of Agriculture to raise awareness about food stamps for senior citizens and kids.
Is the government now pushing for senior citizens to take more handouts in the form of food stamps?
Well, as our nation faces a oh, you think this is funny, Stuart Varney? Our nation is facing $1 trillion deficit. Can we afford it? We ask you.
Of course you cannot afford it. Now,
Of course you cannot afford food stamps for the poor, but you sure can't afford tax cuts for the rich, right? By the way, did you notice the giant "Who's Ruining the Economy" graphic over there? What's better than watching a bunch of media millionaires yuck it up on a comfy couch and demonize the poorest of the poor in America, including children who haven't had enough food to eat each day unless the government steps in to help them? 47% of all food stamp recipients in America are under the age of 18. Anyway, back to the argument. The talking heads were saying that with $1 trillion deficit, we can't afford to give food stamps to more struggling Americans. Well, here's a little Econ 101 lesson for you. We're in debt, so we can either spend more money to stimulate the economy to increase tax revenues and get us out of debt, or we can cut everything like food stamps and unemployment insurance, what they call austerity, to bring spending levels down. Austerity is what Greece is doing, and this is what's happening in Greece. It's what the UK is doing, and their economy hasn't seen any real growth in over a year, and they too have had riots. That's because when you cut spending, you're essentially taking money out of working people's pockets, meaning that they have less to spend at the store, meaning stores lose business and have to fire employees, and ultimately the economy gets worse. And since people are making less money and thus paying fewer taxes, the government gets starved of revenue and the debt problem gets worse. That's why European nations that have chosen austerity are seeing their debt to GDP ratios skyrocket. So when the gang at Fox and Friends says, we can't afford food stamps, they're pushing austerity and shoving us down the same path Greece is on today. Got it? On the other hand, if you preserve and strengthen food stamps and other basic government spending programs, you keep money in people's pockets. They spend that money at the grocery store and other stores, which in turn increases demand for farmers and new products. And the grocery store and other stores have to hire new workers to put new products on the shelves. Just a small government infusion of money into the economy provides a lot of bang for the buck. In fact, food stamps are the best bang for the buck when it comes to stimulus. According to Moody's, not exactly a left-wing bastion, $1 spent on food stamps generates $1.73 in economic activity. $1 spent on unemployment insurance generates $1.64 in economic activity. On the other hand, the stuff that the Republicans and the gang at Fox and Friends are pushing doesn't really do jack. In fact, it makes the economy worse. Here's the actual numbers. $1 in capital gains tax cuts produces just 37 cents in economic activity. $1 in corporate tax cuts produces just 30 cents in economic activity. And $1 in the Bush tax cuts produced just 29 cents in economic activity. It's called going backwards. This is basic economics. But enough of all this reality-based stuff. Let's get back to what they were saying over on Fox So-Called News.
is this the administration outreach on food stamps actually buying votes?
Sure.
Question number one.
Yes.
Number two.
Oh, sure it is. Of course. That's what the Obama re-election team is banking on, trading food stamps for votes. The only thing missing from the Fox and Friends couch in this segment is a set of tinfoil hats. Because here's what they don't want you to know. If the proliferation of food stamps is a re-election ploy, then that explains how President George W. Bush was re-elected. Despite what you might think when you hear Newt Gingrich do his racial dog whistle stuff by calling President Obama the food stamp president, Bush was the real food stamp president. As USA Today reports, we asked the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Food and Nutrition Service for month-by-month figures going back to January 2001. And they show that under President George W. Bush, the number of recipients rose by nearly 14.7 million. Nothing before comes close to that, and under Obama, the increase so far has been 14.2 million. That's right. More people went on food stamps under Bush than any president in history. In fact, in recent months, the number of people on food stamps has been dropping as the economy improves, creating more than 200,000 jobs each of the last 3 months. And every one of those people who was on food stamps no longer is, because they have a job. But why let facts get in the way of the war on the poor, or a really juicy conspiracy theory against President Obama, right? The big picture here is this. Fox So-Called News is the outlet for the super rich in America, to convince average Americans to vote for Republicans who only do things that help the super rich. Thus, it's the place where millions of low-information voters get their talking points. The agenda is simple. Tax cuts for billionaires are talked about in a way that make working people think they're going to get something, when they won't. Or at the most, they'll get 50 or 100 bucks a year. The death tax, I call it the Paris Hilton tax, that only hits 0.3% of Americans, is talked about in ways that cost most Tea Partiers, who will never have a multi-million-dollar estate, that it wouldn't even come close to, that causes those Tea Partiers to totally freak out. And Fox promotes wild conspiracy theories and flawed economics to advance this agenda, because it's a network owned by a billionaire, run by and starring millionaires, whose only purpose is to advance the interests of that economic class. Meanwhile, the economics of giving the rich everything they want and waiting for that wealth to trickle down to the rest of us has been proven time and time again to crash the economy from 1929 to 2008. Reagan came in and said, we're going to have trickle-down economics, everything's going to be fine, make the rich rich, and all that money will eventually, you know, if we make a lot of yachts, it's going to put a lot of people to work. Well, except that we don't make yachts so much in the United States anymore. Well, if we make a whole bunch of jet airplanes, well, they're doing that down in Brazil now and in Canada. But just kind of ignore all that stuff. I guess that's really the idea. The reality is that a nation running on trickle-down economics produces nothing more than a nation full of peons. And beyond that, there's a pretty simple concept that's ignored at Fox. And that's that in the richest planet, the nation on the planet, 20 million children shouldn't be hungry. And by feeding them, we actually stimulate the economy, which will help us get out of this recession. A recession that Republicans in an election year with a Democrat in the White House very much want to keep going and keep Americans in pain up until November. That's the reality of what's going on. So we all have to begin talking back to the millionaires and billionaires propaganda outlets, from Limbaugh to Fox So-Called News, and get to work on the real problems facing this country, like hungry people and the corporate takeover of our democracy and our economy.